This isn't an interview about funding, and it's not really about a shutdown either. What you're hearing is something more revealing, a moment when trust in government quietly collapses, not because of ideology, but because people started watching with their own eyes. And once that happens, there's no going back. On the surface, this exchange sounds procedural, questions about ICE funding, timelines, and the risk of a government shutdown. But from a third-angle perspective, this conversation is actually about something far more destabilizing, the breakdown of credibility across multiple institutions at the same time. Notice how often the word trust appears and how quickly it's dismissed. Trust but verify is mentioned almost immediately, but then reframed. Handshakes no longer matter. What matters is what's written down. That shift is subtle but profound. It signals a governing environment where verbal assurances from leadership are no longer considered meaningful, even inside Washington. That's not normal, and it's not accidental. When the speaker describes ICE as engaging in rogue activity, he's not just criticizing tactics. He's implicitly drawing a boundary between lawful enforcement and something closer to autonomy, roving agents, no warrants, no identification. In institutional terms, that's the line where enforcement stops being predictable and starts becoming intimidating.
Do you think that there's a world that Democrats and the White House are able to reach an agreement on what that looks like? And second question, how long would you want a CR to go for to cover DHS?
Listen, I think the ball's now in the Republican leadership court. My understanding is the White House has moved dramatically and agreed to a framework. Nobody's going to trust anybody, so it's going to be trust but verify and see what the leader lays down. I think we need the shortest time possible, and I think there's some back and forth, whether that's a week or 2 weeks, to try to negotiate. And again, what we're talking about here is, let's just get rid of the rogue activity. Let's move ICE back to where they identified themselves. They weren't traveling in roving bands without warrants. Some of the traditional protocols that they operated under literally for years and years. So we'll see over this afternoon and tomorrow, but the clock's ticking.
You talked about trust. Do you think the White House is operating in good faith?
I believe that handshakes are not the coin of the realm right now. We need to see things in writing, and the notion that we're going to somehow trust what their initial position was. Well, we'll do this on executive action. That doesn't pass the smell test. I think Americans would uniformly reject it. And I tell you, this is not just Minneapolis. Hanover County, Virginia, which is about as red as it gets in Virginia, outer suburb of Richmond. Last night, citizens turned out in overwhelming numbers, and the local board of supervisors voted 6-1 against supporting an ICE facility coming to their county. That wouldn't have happened 6 or 9 months ago. I think these images, I think in a strange way, the fact that we've all been caught up in the storm, not just here, but across the country, meant when the administration was lying about what happened with the most recent shooting of Mr. Preti, that somehow he was a terrorist or brandishing a weapon, people saw with their own eyes, and they realized they were lying. And that has been a game changer.
And then comes the real turning point. The speaker references the public reaction, not in liberal strongholds, but in deeply conservative areas. Hanover County, Virginia. 6-1 votes against an ICE facility. He points out that this would not have happened months ago. From a third-angle view, this is evidence of something rare in American politics: narrative fracture. When images contradict official statements so clearly that even historically aligned communities stop accepting explanations, legitimacy erodes fast. Pay attention to this line. People saw with their own eyes, and they realized they were lying. That's the moment the speech becomes dangerous, not rhetorically but politically. Governments survive controversy. They do not survive disbelief. The discussion of a shutdown seems almost secondary, but it serves a purpose. It grounds the abstract loss of trust in real consequences: unpaid workers, contractors who don't get reimbursed, people cleaning federal buildings who disappear from the conversation entirely. This is how institutional failure trickles downward. Then the conversation expands, and this is where the analysis deepens. Suddenly, we're no longer talking only about ICE or DHS. We're talking about voting records in Georgia, FBI leadership turnover, warrants signed by officials from outside the jurisdiction, missing election data, confusion over where sensitive information even is.
To Americans who rely on the federal government, they're now staring down the barrel of a very short shutdown. Concerned TSA employees might not get paid depending on how long this thing goes on. What's your message to Americans who are worried to see another government shutdown, even if it just lasts the weekend or a little longer?
Listen, I wish we'd have seen movement from our Republican friends beforehand. We knew this was going to be an enormous issue. After the activity over the last few weeks in Minneapolis, particularly after the second killing. I will make clear that the TSA workers, if there's a short-term shutdown, they will be paid back. That is ensured. But there are folks, and one of the things I think sometimes people forget, the contractors don't get repaid, and people say, well, contractors, that must be the high-end, lobbyist-type defense contractor. It is those folks, but it's also all the folks who clean the toilets at federal buildings are not federal workers, they're all federal contractors. And they wouldn't get repaid. So that's why let's bring this to a head, let's get this done, have a path towards reforms, and move forward.
And then briefly on another matter with respect to your committee intel, I know you put forth a request for a briefing from OD&I today. Have you heard back from them? Do you expect a briefing?
What happened in Atlanta yesterday, I got a lot of questions. We all know that President Trump is obsessed about the fact that he lost Georgia and he lost the 2020 election. But the idea that almost 6 years later, he's trying to push Justice Department to confiscate voting records is more than bizarre. You layer on top of that, and I'm trying to get all the information now. My understanding is the FBI head of the field office in Atlanta has either quit or been fired. I want to find out what happened there. Was that because the FBI didn't think this was a legitimate investigation? And normally, if there is going to be an investigation, the person who signs the request for the warrant is the U.S. attorney from the jurisdiction. Well, it's not a U.S. attorney from Georgia that signed it, it's a U.S. attorney from Missouri. What the heck is going on? And you hear from the election officials in Fulton County, they have no idea where their data, their information has gone to. Is it safe? Is it secure? Is this an effort to intimidate in terms of 2026 elections? One of the things I'm concerned about on the roving ICE agents, I don't want roving gangs of ICE agents showing up at polling stations. That would obviously intimidate voters.
From the third angle, this isn't a scattershot rant. It's a pattern being assembled in real time. Each example points to the same underlying anxiety: who is exercising power and under whose authority. The mention of roving ICE agents near polling stations is especially telling. That's not a hypothetical concern. It's a warning about voter intimidation without needing explicit orders. When enforcement presence becomes unpredictable, its mere visibility can alter behavior. Finally, the focus turns to intelligence leadership, and the tone changes again. The criticism isn't loud, but it's sharp. The dismantling of foreign influence safeguards, the absence of briefings, the unexplained appearance of senior officials where they weren't invited. The suggestion that loyalty may be outweighing responsibility. The most alarming part isn't any single allegation. It's the accumulation: ICE actions, election data, intelligence silence, leadership reshuffling, all happening at once, all justified individually. But together they paint a picture of institutions drifting, not toward coordination, but toward insulation from oversight.
And then you got the question of, what in the heck is Tulsi Gabbard doing? The FBI has said they didn't invite her. The job of the Director of National Intelligence is to look at foreign interference in our elections. And if one of the things of the many things that's bothered me about Ms. Gabbard is that she, over the last year, has literally taken apart the Foreign Malign Influence Center that was set up during the first Trump administration. And I don't give the first Trump administration a lot of credit, but what they did on election security was darn good. But the fact that she dismantled that, trying to ignore about influence, and now is showing up. So if there's any evidence of foreign interference, she's clearly broken her obligations as director of DNI to tell the intelligence community, because we've heard none of this, or is this just an effort, a kind of a pathetic effort to try to appeal to her boss and get back in his good graces, to feed into his obsession, because clearly she has been excluded from almost any of the foreign activity, Venezuela, Iran, Greenland, NATO, been in none of these activities. You know, it's been CIA, it's been the Defense Department, it's been other parts of the IC. So we got a lot of questions, and I think you'll find, and I hope I have more to say about this later, that it's not just the Democrats have questions about what she was doing there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This exchange isn't asking viewers to panic, it's asking them to notice. Because when governments stop relying on trust, when citizens stop believing explanations, and when power begins operating faster than accountability, the most important question is who's right. It's whether anyone is still clearly in charge and willing to explain themselves when it matters. That's the real issue hiding in this conversation. If you find this analysis helpful, you are welcome to subscribe. Thank you for watching.